All right, here we go.
Shows that make you laugh. Shows that make you think. Music that moves you. It could only be one place. Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
It's time for the Bonnie Share Show, a whirlwind of wit, wisdom, celebrity, and the boomer life. With a little bit of this and a lot of that and so much more you don't want to miss, here's Bonnie.
And hello. And thank you for being with us. I'm your host, Bonnie Share, and I would like to shout out to Wayne Cobham for our Super Duper theme song. Thank you, Wayne. I am your host and guide through the worlds of entertainment, the great boomer generation, and the world of type 1 diabetes and the T1D community. Today's guests are painter, author, teller of the family tales, the wonderful Andy Hammerstein. Hello, Andy. Are you there?
I am here. I'm so sorry I called late. Had a problem with my phone. I apologize.
It's okay. You come from a nice family. My mother would tell me to give you another chance. It's a nice boy from a good family. Thank you for getting to us. Andy, before we go any farther, how are you?
I am fine. I'm fine. Nice to put a voice with all those words.
I know. The story on that, ladies and gentlemen, is this gentleman with whom I speaketh now is my great defeater. Can you believe I can actually beat certain people at Words with Friends? You're not really one of them, but...
Not really one of them.
No. But I learn a lot. It's sort of like...
It's sweet of you.
No, because you don't know what I call you when you're not on the radio with me.
So how can I help you entertain these people out there in the ether here?
Well, I have some questions that I'd like to ask you. First of all, I'd like to bring up your work as an author. And the first thing I would like to do is bring up, am I in camera in focus with this? I do love when people send me their books before I do a show with them. But I got to tell you, I went out and bought this one for cash because I had to have it. And this is long before I ever knew that we would be doing this interview.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
No,
That's good.
It's just delicious and wonderful. And I have some questions so that our listeners are going to want to run right out to their computer, to their video.
I like your attitude.
Well, yeah. Were there any autobiographical elements that you discovered about the family in preparation and in doing the book, things that you had never known before?
Yes, there were a couple of, a few skeletons that I shook that I didn't know I would come across. I solved a couple of puzzles that had been, that other biographers had just skipped over lightly, and that made me feel good. A little bit of, when you get into the research really hard and you really bore down into the details, you really can something can actually pop up that wasn't there before. And I was very proud of a few genealogical lines that I put together, and that was nice.
Could you maybe give us an example of one of those?
Well, sure. There was my great-great-grandfather, Oscar the First, who founded Times Square. He had 4 boys, And he had 4 boys, and he lived up in Harlem. And there were 3 birth certificates, and one of them was missing. And I couldn't find it. They'd all been delivered by the same midwife up in Harlem, but I couldn't find that 4th boy. And I couldn't figure out, when he was referred to by his age, it sounded to me like he was the same age as one of the other boys. And I said, okay, wait a minute. That can't be. If they were twins, they would have been born together. If they couldn't be born more than 9 months, they'd have to be born more than 9 months apart, unless it wasn't their child. And I did some boring in, and I realized that what I had in my hands was a cousin who had been folded into the family. And I found that out only by looking at that second boy's death certificate, where he is listed as having come from Selma, Alabama. So you find out something in like 1914 about their birth in 1875, little tiny silly things like that, but you go, well, that solves that mystery, and little things like that. We just, where you connect the dots and things kind of fit all of a sudden and they make sense. So that was one little thing. I found a lot of other things about Oscar and his work methods, which I found interesting. Quite a few things, actually. It's worth buying the book, I say.
Well, that's another question that I have. Not will you buy the book, but all of those things that you just mentioned. But before I get to that question,
sure.
Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather were all American theater pioneers. How did this whole journey of rediscovering their legacy start for you?
It was interesting. When I was a little boy, I had this photograph of Oscar Hammerstein the First. He was surrounded by all sorts of people. It's like a 1916 photo, and for years people would say to me, "Oh, your grandfather Oscar is very famous." But then I would look at this other Oscar on my wall, and he's surrounded by the people like Jerry Kern and Irving Berlin and John Philip Sousa, and I'm realizing this is a much older Oscar. And I started to realize that I didn't really know very much about my own family. And in a way, it was my way of kind of claiming my own legacy, because our family is quite disparate and very theatery and not that sentimental, and I wasn't really taught in the ways of my family. So I took it upon myself to teach myself all I could about it, as a way of becoming like a family historian, as a way originally of just getting to know what Oscar II's music was at the Library of Congress, just starting to do research for my own interest. And that led slowly into my collecting material, which you can see in my book. I've been collecting thousands of pieces of articles of ephemera and photographs that I knew that one day I would make a book. I just didn't know, but it took me 20 years to assemble what I wanted to assemble in order for me to actually get it all out as simply as I did. So was fun.
I'm glad that you had fun, because I'm certainly having a lot of fun with it.
Good.
The Hammersteins have such a long lineage in the American theater, from Oscar the First, the businessman, to William Hammerstein as a theatrical manager, to Oscar the Second, the lyricist, and to you on down. It's what we would call theater royalty.
You got to also say that Oscar II's only student was Stephen Sondheim. So
not a bad gig, huh?
Not a bad gig. It's
I would have liked to have rolled in that one. But is this talent? Is this genetic? Do you not have bobsleds in San Juan, or is it just a case of you all staying in the family business?
I don't know if it's. I mean, it's easy to say. It's a lazy thing to say that it's genetic, because it fits so easily. But I think you got to be bit by the theater bug, and being bit by the theater bug is more like a disease than a genetic inheritance. I think that it's a learned thing that's passed down in families, to be taken with the power of telling stories. I think if you're exposed to that when you're a young man and you get bit by that bug, then you pass that on, getting bit by that bug to your own children.
Bite me!
You bite me.
So let me ask you a question. After we're done biting, is there a downside of being part of such a prestigious family in show business?
It depends on how you view your life, really. I could see as it creates a rather impenetrable shadow if you're trying to claw your way out from underneath it and make a name for yourself. I mean, I think my father had a tough time of it. He did a lot of Pinter and Simon Gray plays and Israel Harvest plays and a lot of revivals and a lot of musicals. He did a lot of work as a director, but I think it wore on him to be always the son of. In a way, for me, I have at least a generation's distance from that, so it's not as much of a problem for me. And also, I sort of shamelessly embrace it by writing books and speaking publicly about it. So, I found a way to deal with it in a way that's not so bad. I sort of hit it head on for me, and I entertain thousands of people a year with the songs of my grandfather, and I like it. I like doing it. I feel very lucky. I feel really like I was born in a really lucky place, and instead of feeling cowed by it,
Right.
I feel rather to just embrace it.
It's a wonderful choice to make, my goodness.
Yeah.
What do you think about the current state of the Broadway theater now? I mean, have we lost anything in our storytelling since your granddad's day?
That's a huge question. There are some wonderful, musicals being written. You got to remember, like when people walk out of the theater these days, they say, "Oh, well, they don't make them like they used to. Can't hum those tunes." Well, you have to understand that the whole market has completely changed. That back in the day when Oscar was writing lyrics, to songs, those shows were the center spot of musical culture. They weren't an arcane or eclectic art form. They were really the center. Like when a show like Oklahoma opens up, 5 of those songs will go through the hit parade. Gives you an idea of how central to culture shows like those were back then. Now it's very peripheral to what it is kids are listening to now, and it's also much more expensive to put on shows. So a person like Oscar II grew up at a time, when he was putting on shows between 1920 and 1960. He put on 63 shows. We know there was like a handful of them, obviously, but I mean, he had the ability to have that experience, to fail and then go back and do it and do 3 a year. And that's kind of that's not something you can do anymore. It's much more complicated.
Well, also,
So the world has
because they
changed.
were, pardon me, but I think, as we're talking about the new work, let's also take a moment to look at the revivals. There's a
Oh, yeah.
reason, there's a reason that we're seeing so many revivals, and we always have. I'm still waiting for a revival of Shenandoah, but I suppose it'll happen.
I'm sure it'll happen. Yes, I mean, the older shows got a kind of nod, a cultural nod, a nod of approval, in a time when they opened in 1943 and 1945, and times when they were embraced by a public, and that goodwill, that good embracement, that's something that sticks with them. Like they have a kind of good karma that protects them against becoming passe. So people will go and still see Oklahoma.
Did
still
they
will see
know
South
what
Pacific.
they had? Did your grandfather and Richard Rogers have any idea what their names would become?
No.
They had no idea. Isn't that something?
No idea. I mean, let's be honest. Richard Rogers is probably the single greatest musical composer for the Broadway stage ever. And had he never even met my grandfather, he probably still would be considered the best. He's in that sweet spot between Irving Berlin and George Gershwin.
It's a nice sweet spot.
He was always good. So he had his place firmly established. Oscar had his reputation was in the past. He had Rosemary and he had Showboat. But when they got together, Oscar had pretty much 11 years of failure. So they came at each other from two very different positions. Richard Rogers was coming in on the bounds of success, but he was also, his collaboration with Larry Hart was falling completely apart because Larry was falling completely apart. And Oscar, even though he was on the ropes and a has-been and washed up and the phone's not ringing, he was working on Carmen Jones. He had written The Last Time I Saw Paris. Something was happening inside him creatively that made him more than prepared for dealing with Richard Rogers. And they came together as equals, and not as friends, but as perfect collaborators. Oscar asked that they write the music, the lyrics first,
Yeah, I
so
read
it would
that.
follow the book musical play more closely. And I think that inspired Richard Rodgers to write more in a more complicated, less writing tunes and more like writing compositions. And I think it changed him. The limitation, in a funny way, freed him. And he wasn't doing the heavy lifting anymore like he was doing with his relationship with Rodgers and Hart. So they were perfect together. I mean, they said that when they met and started working, it was like perfect chemistry. They were right on each other's wavelength.
Sort of meant to be, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, if
very
you
much so.
believe in those kinds of things, which I do.
You know, I try to strip away mythology. I mean, they did have tough times through the 50s. But, you know, that's because I think a lot of people got the memo. You know, by 1947, 49, they were writing shows like South Pacific and King and I, but you know, soon to follow would be things like Kiss Me Kate and Guys and Dolls and My Fair Lady. And basically the book musical play, as they had invented it, was now being taken up in the hands of younger and very talented composers as well. So I like to say that those are the kinds of shows that are Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, not written by Rodgers and Hammerstein, but I think they wouldn't have happened without the effect of Rodgers and Hammerstein. Kind of upped everybody's game. And that's all to the good.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that people are born with talent, or do you think it's acquired? Can it be acquired?
Well, it can be acquired. I mean, if you look at Oscar II, to be honest with you, I mean, he had way more failures than successes. We know him for Oklahoma Carousel, South Pacific, King and I, and Sound of Music. We know him for Rosemarie, and we know him for Showboat. But if you subtract those, and maybe one or two more, you separate the 10 that we know him for from the 63 that he had written. Right. His flop to hit ratio was not good. So he obviously learned a lot on the way. He did.
All right, I'm going to compose myself now.
And I'm going to say also that look, he brought a lot to the table. He had a certain humanity to him and a compassion, and you know, and something of a poet in him. That's the one thing that Irving Berlin used to say about Oscar, is that the difference between Oscar Hammerstein and the rest of us composers is that he's a poet. And I understand that. I grasp what he does.
Lovely.
It's amazing.
Well, speaking of talent, let's talk about your paintings for a moment, if we can.
Sure, of course.
The first thing I want to know is, this is going to sound a little punny also, but what drew you to painting? I warned you.
I always had that gift. This coming upon theater history was a secondary thing in my life. In a way, like, I was busy painting in New York City as a young man, and I needed to make a living, and I had this, incredible family, but I wanted to I wanted to do something for the family business. Mm-hmm. There was really no place for me, so I said, why don't I just do some research about this? And that's kind of how I got into the business of all this history. But really, art came first. Art was something which I still do, and I've been doing ever since I was professionally, since I was 17.
Well, I've seen several of your collections now, not personally, but visually, and City at Night, which I loved I love and adore all of them, but City at Night really called out to me. Your series of erotic nudes I found fabulous, and this coming from the porno king's daughter, but that's another story for another day. Yeah, what can I tell you? That's why he had to produce Shenandoah, to keep the feds off his back. What are you working on now? I know you're painting again.
I'm doing a couple of commissions for some friends of mine. I'm doing some fall change paintings, and I'm also I just finished a little painting of White Street at night in the city. It's like a small, sweet painting. I've been doing those.
I love your circles also. Also the painting that I thought I could afford, which unfortunately at the time I wasn't able to. It was the clown.
Oh, sure.
I loved her. Now you know why. I mean, I totally relate to her. So here's my final question I have two more. Quickly, are there any other up-and-coming Hammersteins we should be looking out for?
Oh, I would hate to make any idle boasts. I'm attempting to write a musical of my own. It's a little darker than the usual Hammerstein fare. So that, I hope, will be coming out within a year.
You heard it
two.
hopefully here first, folks. If not,
I haven't told anyone that. And then, of course, there's my crazy brother Simon, who's always doing something. He runs nightclubs around the country, actually around the world, and he does a rather risque Weimar Republic-styled burlesque shows. And I'm sure he'll come up with something in his time too. Keep your eyes on us. We'll be out here somewhere.
Well, I certainly look forward to that. I'm pulling a quote here from Publishers Weekly, and in capping up their review, I loved it, and it ends with, and I quote, "Like Oscar II's musicals, it's intelligent, fun, and nimbly written."
Nimbly written is my favorite part of that. Thank you.
I would like to do anything nimbly.
Is a compliment for me.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, get your hands on the book. Oh, but one more thing, Andy. How can people
Yes, ma'am.
see your artwork?
Oh, I don't know at this moment. I'm redesigning my website for the future.
Will you let
can
us
just
know?
Google, of course, but you can Google my name and a pile of them will come up. So you help yourself to that. They're easy to see. And, of course, I'm on Facebook, which is easy enough, too. So if you want to see my work, it can be done.
Very good. Andy, thank you so very much for sitting in with me today.
My pleasure. Sorry, I got to the phone a little late.
Well, but
next
you
time will be right.
got there and right in time for that before the second act curtains. It all works.
All right.
It was a pleasure
Nice to talk
speaking
to you
with
finally,
you.
and we'll be in contact, I'm sure, going forward.
Thank you, Andy. All the
You're
best.
welcome. Have a great day.
You too now. You are listening to The Bonnie Share Show. Join the conversation. You can follow us on Twitter at #BSHER. Right, that's me. BSHER Radio. BSHER Radio. He confused me so much. I want to go read everything on Twitter now. Coming up in our show, Inside My Blue World, plus a shout out from the Soapbox. Who got it right this week and who should be ashamed? Let's go to break with one of my favorite Hammerstein tunes that sums up pretty much how I'm feeling today. It was my mantra as a child when I first heard it, and I used to fantasize to this song. The song is in my own little corner, and it is sung in this version by Laura Osnes. Please take it away.
I'm as mild and as meek as a mouse. When I hear a command, I obey. But I know of a spot in my house where no one can stand in my way. In my own little corner, in my own little chair, I can be whatever I want to be. On the wing of my fancy, I can fly anywhere, and the world will open its arms to me. I'm a young Norwegian princess or a milkmaid. I'm the greatest prima donna in Milan. I'm an heiress who has always had her silk made by her own flock of silkworms in Japan. I'm a girl men go mad for, love's a game I can play with a cool and confident kind of air. a queen in Peru. I'm a mermaid dancing upon the sea. I'm a huntress on an African safari. It's a dangerous type of sport, and yet it's fun. In the night I sally forth to seek my quarry, and I find I forgot to bring my gun. I am lost in the jungle all alone and unarmed when I meet a lioness in her lair. Then I'm glad to be back in my own little corner, all alone in my own little chair.
Well, welcome back. And I'm Bonnie Scher. Joining me in this segment is Kiwi Adams,
Hello.
hello Kiwi, who is a member of the T1D community, our type 1 diabetes group, from right here in the Los Angeles area. Welcome. How are you, Kiwi?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted that you got here.
I thought you were going to
and
say
that-
disgusted.
Well, maybe later. So far, it's pretty good. You know, you do get points for being a type 1 diabetic.
Woohoo.
Yeah, well, yeah. You know, I can't say that about everybody. Some people are on their own and
They're not so lucky.
terrifying, and not so terrific. We like to ask our co-hosts to tell us about their story, your story of your diabetes predominantly.
Well, I was 11 years old in Florida on my vacation with my grandparents, and that is a vacation I will never forget. So that was 32 years ago.
Tell us about how that started, how it was picked up, what were you like symptomatically, and how,
I
give me a
was
little-
one of those kids that never was inside. Like, if you just gave me a chance, I'd go just run through the streets until the sun went down and say, come on back in. So I was on vacation with my grandparents. I would spend all day long in the pool with my with the other kids that were there. And it got to where I was going out later, coming in earlier. And then we actually came across a letter I had written to my mom that said, Grandma thinks I drink a lot. I don't drink a lot, do I? And it's just amazing that it got to the point where my whole routine was I'd wake up, eat a peach, throw up, and then drink some 7-Up, and then go about my day. That was how it was. And I got to the point where I wasn't leaving the house, and I decided to take a shower one morning, and my grandmother walked in. I was laying on the floor of the shower. And they said, that's it. We're going to the doctor. Went to get dressed, and I passed out and woke up. And a couple of times, I remember going like in and out. And so I just remember waking up one time, and then my parents were there. And I said to them, what are you doing here? And they're like, don't you want to know what you're doing here? Because I had like tubes everywhere. And by that time, I was in the ICU and came to find out it was ketoacidosis.
I was going to say, DKN.
My blood sugar hit a record for that hospital. That was 1,295.
They should have sold at 1,100, didn't you tell them? Oh, my goodness.
But you know what? Being in the community now, I found that's not so bad. I've met people that beat my number much higher, but that's a number you don't forget is that diagnosis number. And so I spent 3 days in the ICU, had the best care from the nurses. I was really into Garfield at the time, and they bought me like little Garfield stuffed animals, kept me going, and then ended up on the peds floor. And that's when the doctor sat on my bed and said, do you know what diabetes is? And from there, it was just a whole new adventure. So, yeah.
And we know it's a daily adventure.
Yes. To the minute sometimes. To the minute adventure.
Well, you and I were chatting yesterday briefly about the event this coming Sunday. Why don't you tell our listeners about the event, please?
Oh, yes. A charity very close to our hearts is the JDRF, formerly known as the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And this Sunday is the walk to cure diabetes.
Where does it start from?
I believe it's at the Rose Bowl this year. So you may have remembered it. It was at the Dodger Stadium a lot, and now last year it moved to the Rose Bowl, and I'll be there helping out. I'm really active with the cycling team, and so I'll be at the
I saw some
booth.
photos of you cycling, as a matter of fact.
Yeah,
I
unfortunately
will
this
not
year.
be cycling, and I will not be there. I will be in my bed, and I will be drinking my coffee, and I will be cheering and cheering and cheering. But all of that stuff that she just said, I don't do any of it.
Yeah.
But
I do
support
that kind of
all of them.
You just make it known to the world.
That's what I do.
That's what you do best.
Not too good at that other stuff. What I'd like to do now is to take a couple of minutes to listen to my pre-taped Inside My Blue World. And we'll be talking, pardon me, about some headlines that are making news as we speak around the globe and across the web. So I'd like you to take a listen to this with me and with our audience. And then I'm going to ask you for your thoughts. So do me a favor, take a listen. Hello, and welcome to the My T1 Group podcast, Inside My Blue World. I am your host and Type 1 Diabetes Crusader, Bonnie Share. This is my weekly share, headlines from around the globe and across the net. Some will pique your interest, inspire, or frankly tick you off, but all are topics for discussion with our diabetes care team and the T1D community. You can find the links on my blog at bonnieshare.com. This week, Type 1 Research and Development. My first headline share is Rebooted Pancreas Cells Could Ease Type 1 Diabetes. According to the article in New Scientist, a team of Belgian researchers are testing a technique that could potentially help Type 1s manage blood sugar levels without the need for daily injections. My second share is from the Stanford University School of Medicine, Drug Prevents Type 1 Diabetes in Mice. It profiles the findings of a study to prevent the onset of Type 1 diabetes in humans. My last share, by way of WHDH.com, is Potential Diabetes Breakthrough. This report summarizes the results of cell transplantation in Diabetes Research Institute funded trial. That's my weekly share. For the links to these headlines, please visit my blog at bonnieshare.com. Until we connect again, may your A1Cs be low and your resilience high. So which one would you like to attack first?
I love the idea that it can ease diabetes.
Right. It's like ease on down the road.
It's like being a
Come
little.
on and take that glucose and ease on down.
Is it like being a little pregnant? I mean, you still got the ease.
Ease
would be go away.
Right.
Don't have to think about it.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be so awesome.
Do you remember the last time you didn't have to think about it all day from the minute you got up to the minute you went to bed?
I really don't.
I don't either.
Uh-uh.
And I wasn't that much older than you when I was first diagnosed, but it's exactly the same story. I kept flopping down. You know? But let's go back to this again. I think that the DRI has some wonderful intentions, and they are getting, I mean, everybody, we see lots and lots of studies being brought. You there was a period of time where I really was into that thing. Oh, well, it's the Americans and we're, so money hungry and they could probably do this if they wanted to. But then how do you explain Canada and Israel and Russia and all of the countries who are doing this extreme research, and it is not from the same place? The issue being, well, it can't be done yet. That code has not really been opened and unlocked. So there's a lot of talk.
Piece by piece, they're trying to find it. And I love that it's so open and there's so many different ways that are being looked at, not just one pathway. They're with the isolate cells, and they're capturing them, and they're creating stamps or inserts or things.
And then they have to give them little cradles so that they don't get sick and die like our first set did.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's like, okay, they died the first time. You create them. You got
That's
to prevent them from dying again.
That was sort of the rub that I had with that as well. And I'm sure most of us who have dealt with the disease certainly understand. There was something else that you mentioned to me about, there was something that was coming up beside the walk that you, I know. Tell me about, okay. I'm going to share with our audience that Kiwi is an RN and works in pediatrics. So what's happening now with this career, this medical marvel person, sweet woman, you?
So it took me a while to figure out that this is my calling in life, is to help those children with diabetes and realize that they can have a very full life and not be limited. And I was telling Bonnie about my story the school year after I was diagnosed, how I hadn't met any diabetics. And the first friend I met, her mom was type 1 diabetic. And it was amazing, and found out she was a nurse. And it's just a weird way of how things come about, because I was lucky enough to have a role model and know that I could have a family. And not everybody gets that. Not every kid gets that.
That's for sure.
They get that stigma. They are different. And here was a chance for me to have a regular childhood and teenage life. And so I want to bring that to the table. So my passion now is to work with kids with diabetes from the moment that they're diagnosed, and bring them, up into the adulthood. Because that's the transition.
I certainly would pray that there was never another child with type 1.
Yeah, it's so sad every time they're on the unit.
However, if it has to happen, please, Lord, let them either get to you or somebody who gets it the way you do, because y'all are few and far between. And it's not just the nurses, it's the MDs. It's shocking to me how isolated and insulated they are into their own specialties. I had a doctor say to me not too long ago, "But you're so thin." I just really wanted to smack them.
I hate when I go to a doctor and I know more than them.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and I always have been told that if they have the coats buttoned down the front, that means they're the doctor, and if your tushy's hanging out the back, then you're the patient. I think that they should walk around like 25 minutes a year with their tushy's hanging out the back and let us button up the front. Well, I'm afraid that I am going to have to cut us off so that we can go on to my next segment, but I want to thank you for sitting in with me today. And if any of my fellow type 1s would like to be a co-host for this segment with me, I ask you to please just email me at bonnieshare.com. It's just as easy as that. Now,
can I ask a question?
You may.
Something interesting is coming up. I don't know if you've heard about concierge medical care is the big thing right now.
Yes.
And I'm studying to be an NP, nurse practitioner on the pediatrics level. And I'm wondering if this is something that would be helpful for parents to have for their kids, if they would be willing. So if any of your listeners want to call in or type in and tell me what they think if that would sound good to them. It's a personalized health provider.
I think that would be an invaluable service. I mean,
I know
I've
in
never
San Diego
been the
they're
parent-
doing it.
I've never been the parent of a type 1, but I know what a pain and difficult child I was or teen. And I think that would just be phenomenal. Of any of the projects that you're hearing about now, is there anything that sort of gets you going more? Or think
I just don't want them to call surgery a cure when it's going to have to be redone. It's not a cure. If
It's not a cure.
It's a treatment. It's a
Correct.
advanced treatment, but it's not a cure. A cure is where I don't have to worry about it again.
ever.
No, I don't want to have to. Oh, well, it's starting to fail. We got to go in again. I mean, that's what I'm hearing a lot of the cures. But I want to be treated, and I want it to be gone.
How about Treaton Street? Could we just be at Treaton Street? Wouldn't you just
Freedom!
right? I'm closer to my pump. I mean, virtually intimate with my pump.
My pump's
Nothing.
been in many places. Nowhere it has gone.
Well, again, I say thank you. And who knows, maybe you'll come back and play again sometime.
Well, only on Words with Friends for right now.
That's what we're going to have to do. Well, thanks for sitting in with me. And again, if any of my fellow Type 1s would like to be my co-host for a session on Type 1 diabetes, it's so easy. Just email me at bonnieshare.com and we'll make it happen. It's now time for my shout-outs and my shout-downs. First, I'd like to give a shout-out to a financial writer for the LA Times, Michael Hiltzik, for his article, High Price for a Cure. And he poses the question, if the drug companies can jack up the price of a single pill by 5,000%, what's going to happen, and how are the patients going to be able to pay for all of these new advanced medical therapies and cures? Where's this money going to come from? It's a very interesting read, and again, it was in last Sunday's Los Angeles Times, and it's Michael Hiltzik, Hiltzik. I suggest you give it a read. It's the front page Financial Times article. Now, for my shout down. It's even kind of hard for me to talk about it. I just found it so distasteful and so wrong. The shout down is to Ben Carson for trivializing the plight of the German Jews during the Holocaust. His comment was that, well, if they had had guns, they could have saved themselves. Excuse me, Mr. Carson. You're wrong about guns, and you're certainly wrong about the Holocaust. What in the world could you have been thinking? Well, that's my opinion, and if you have an opinion, please visit my blog and shout it out at bonnieshare.com. Backslash, I could say it, and sound off. Well, that's our show for today, and I hope you'll return next week for another 50-minute trip through the world of celebrity, through the boomerland, and through the world of type 1 diabetes. In the meantime, please visit bonnieshare.com. Follow the number 1, Bonnie Share, on Twitter. And like the Bonnie Sings Lena, that's Lena, Facebook fan page. I again thank today's guests and thank you for sharing the ride. A note of thanks to Corey Bone of Crown and Anchor Jewelry for outfitting me with this hand-watered freshwater pearl with gold-filled drop-shaped focal beads in exchange for this promotional message. Then visit them on Etsy.com. For my new friends, for my old friends, for you and for your friends. There's probably no doubt that Sammy Davis Jr. was an enormous part of my life, of my career, and in shaping me into who I am now. And my friend, if there are speakers up in heaven, then this one's for you.
Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong, I gotta be me. I gotta be me. What else can I be but what I am? I want to live, not merely survive. And I won't give up this dream of life that keeps me alive. I gotta be me. I gotta be me. The dream that I see makes me what I am. That faraway prize, a world of success, is waiting for me if I heed the call. I won't settle down, won't settle for less, as long as there's a chance that I can have it all. I'll go it alone, that's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. I gotta be free.